I got a date with a soap on a rope. Welcome, huge movie fanatic Nate, stopping on by. This time I'm coming your way to do a soundtrack CD review of something that was released in 2020. And I knew about its existence, I guess probably more or less for the last 3 years, ordered some stuff. A couple of things from La La Land Records over the years, the first two Ultimate Cut CD releases for the first two films, and it wasn't until I ordered their CD release for the ultimate cut of the third film, Friday the 13th Part 3, that I decided to go for it and just get this, which I've been wondering if I should get for the last couple of years when I've been buying these other CDs, and it didn't hurt that they were offering 21% off at the time as well. That was probably the main reason I went for it. It's like, because this one normally is like $21 or something. It's actually more than the normal ultimate, any of the other Friday the 13th stuff they offer. Maybe Part 8 is the same price as well. I would imagine Part 8 might be limited to 2,000 like this is as well. And honestly, I figured it's kind of weird. It just shows that maybe there isn't obviously too much of a demand for this. It's been out for 3 years, limited to 2,000, and they're still selling them on the site. I figured I might as well just go for it and get it. Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood, was the very first film I saw when I was a kid because it was the most recent one available on home video, coming your way to showcase, or review rather. Well, it's also showcase as well, I guess, the La La Land Records release of Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood soundtrack, limited to 2,000 units. So briefly, if you don't know anything about the history of this soundtrack release, it's the very first Friday the 13th film where Harry Manfredini wasn't actually involved in any way. By this time, the Canadian production of Friday the 13th, the series, was being shot and made and presented on air, and the Canadian composer by the name of Fred Mullen was doing the music for Friday the 13th series, produced out of Canada, or Canada had some part to play in it. Frank Mancuso Jr. was one of the producers on Friday the 13th, the series, and also being one of the producers on Friday the 13th, Part 7, New Blood. I guess he was kind of like what only made sense. Maybe there was some kind of incentive to have the Canadian composer Fred Mullen have a hand in the soundtrack for the 7th Friday the 13th film, seeing as how he was also working on Friday the 13th, the series. So that's what they did, but unlikely they'd go on to do a year later with Jason Takes Manhattan, the 8th Friday the 13th film. They did a little combination of Harry Manfredini, already existing Harry Manfredini music, mostly from 1, 2, and a lot of 6 in there, and new Fred Mullen stuff. I mean, the Part 8 soundtrack is all Fred Mullen, so I don't really have any interest in that. But what's interesting about this release is it's like, well, if I own the music from Part 1 and 2 and 6, I mean, and I don't have any, then I don't need this, because it's all, the Harry Manfredini stuff. That's why I never got this, because it's like the Harry Manfredini stuff is all contained in the soundtracks of 1, 2, and 6 that I already own. So that's why it took like 3 years for me to get this, and the 21% off and all this kind of stuff. Let's face it, there is a part of me that likes some of the Fred Mullen stuff in this. Like I thought the opening credits was really kind of cool, just the white on black going like this, and just like the boom, 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 and it just like does that over and over, boom, 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 boom. And some of the stuff he writes, Fred Mullen writes for like Jason coming out of the water, just like the dun 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 dun, just like, it's not music necessarily, it's just like these sounds or whatever, but they really had like some weight, they added to Jason coming out of the water and walking out. And also, let's face it, Tina's theme, is classic in my opinion. So this kind of stuff is why I got the CD. It's like, okay, I've been putting this off for 3 years. It's limited to 2,000. Maybe it'll take another 10 years for it to sell out, but in the meantime, I'm going to regret it if I don't snag one of these things. So I snagged one of them, and honestly, I couldn't bring myself to listen to the whole thing yet. I don't know if I'll ever be able to listen to the whole thing, because, in my opinion, the Harry Manfredini, soundtracks for at least, well, I mean, I guess I'm not so keen on the 6, but all 1 through 5. I mean, I can pretty much just sit down and listened to the Friday the 13th soundtracks that Harry Manfredini did for the early films, but like the listening to the Fred Molen music on its own without seeing it, you know, attached to the visuals in the movie, it's like, oh man, it's you know, it works kind of attached to the image in the movie, but when you're listening to it on its own, I'm not so sure it's really worth. Yeah, it's kind of a situation where I part regret getting the CD and part like, well, what the hell? It was 21% off normal price. It's limited. You know, it was the first film I saw when I was a kid. The first film was Part 7, and I mean, at the end of the day, it's fine that I got it. One of the aspects about it that I swear I'd forgotten about when I ordered it, and then when I put it in and played it, I'm like, oh yeah, I could remember reading something about it, and it must have been on some review of the CD that I saw online months ago or whatever. So the issue with this soundtrack CD release is really kind of a bummer. From what I understand, based on what I read online, it doesn't go much into it in the actual booklet in the CD. Not that I could find. But I'm pretty sure I read something online months ago which talks about this CD release and the bummer surrounding it, which is, let's face it, even though the Fred Molen music as it exists in the film really isn't that amazing, but the bummer about this CD release is like it's not necessarily like the Fred Molen stuff. It's not even the entirety of the Fred Molen stuff you hear in the movie, if that makes any sense. This is a stripped down version from what I understand, from what I read online. Like the music that Fred Molen presented, although I guess it was good enough obviously because they used it, they felt like somewhere around the sound mixing stage that there's like maybe it's like here and there, maybe it's a little too plain or something could be added. So I'm not exactly sure about all the finite details, but from what I understand, like sometime after Fred Molen presented them with, you know, his tracks, his cues from Friday the 13th Part 7 soundtrack, maybe the sound editor or the music editor, someone else, before it was actually placed, or while the music was being placed onto the movie, someone had someone add to some of the Fred Molen stuff. So like, for example, the opening credits in the finished film is mainly the dun, 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 and it just that repeats. But then there's like this background stuff, like, I can't do it with my voice because it's electronically produced, but there's also other sounds in the background. And I guess I can only assume that those other sounds were added after, you know, Fred Molen presented his soundtrack, and because unless it's located somewhere else on this CD, which it probably isn't, that extra little background sounds or little enhancements to the opening credits stuff isn't found anywhere on the CD, or at least not on the track here, number 2, which is indicated as main title, cast and crew. So that's one thing to note if you're on the fence and thinking about ordering this CD, is like it's not even the complete Fred Molen stuff that you hear in the movie. It's like not it's and another thing that I can remember reading online is I don't think any of the Fred Molen, as can be evidenced by listening to the CD of like the original Fred Molen stuff he presented before it was put into the film and finished. I don't think any of the Fred Molen stuff originally, as he presented to Paramount or whatever, had any of the like the which is like completely just flooded all over like the whole movie in general, but not only like the Harry Manfredini stuff, but it's also layered in over the Fred Molen stuff in the finished film. And let's face it, that stuff, you know, even during like the Fred Molen stuff, even the like the, you know, the I mean, that stuff enhances, it adds to the Fred Molen stuff. Let's be honest. I mean, the Fred Molen stuff never really achieves, in my opinion, any kind of, you know, and this is just my opinion. If you think differently, that's absolutely fine. But compared to like Harry Manfredini, what he did with the franchise, the first 6 films, the Fred Molen stuff doesn't really achieve any kind of greatness that can anywhere, you know, get to any kind of level as the Harry Manfredini stuff for the first 6 films. So it's like, it was cool to have like the addition that I guess the sound or the music editor or someone would have added after Fred Molen just presented his stuff and went away. And, you know, they add the like the you know, wherever. And I think it was in the booklet contained in this CD that there's some notes about, you know, for years and years and years, you know, Harry Manfredini just presented his music of the films, and that's how it is. But like, I think it was with this film or something, or maybe it wasn't this film. I don't know. Sometime along the line, they asked him to do something which he begrudgingly did. He didn't really want to do, which was to simply record, him going, ch ch ch, you know. And I know he says it's like ch ma, M-A, like C-H-M-A. But to me, when I hear it, I hear, ch, that's what I hear. So that's what I've always done ever since I was a kid. That's what I do as an adult. The ch ch ch. I don't go ma, 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 because it's not how it sounds like to me. But I think even over the years, I think he even changed it a little bit, even like from what it sounds like at the very end of New Beginning, where it's almost like, because Tommy's like, going to be the killer at the end of the movie, I think he even goes ta ta ta, which I think is so freaking cool. I hope I'm hearing that correctly. If I'm not, that's what I'm hearing. That's what I think I'm hearing. But anyway, that's the biggest bummer about this CD soundtrack release, is it's in a way they should they should tell the buyer that this isn't what you hear in the finished version of what you hear in the movie. It's like, but they're not going to say that, because then they're not going to sell as many. So if you're on the fence about buying this, be warned, because let's face it, in my opinion, the Fred Mullins stuff, the finished Fred Mullins stuff that exists in this film, is not necessarily that amazing anyway. But you take away from it, which is the CD release, and take away some of the extra added layers they put on over after the fact, and it's even less interesting. So a little bit of a bummer in that respect. Partly regret buying the CD, partly no big deal, especially since I got 21% off. I can't remember why they chose. I mean, maybe they've been at La La Land Records has been in existence for 21 years. That might be why they did 21% off. But yeah, I mean, it's not something that I can see myself listening to very often, or I mean, I don't even know if I'm ever going to listen to the whole thing. And honestly, it works a lot better in the movie, like the combination of the already existing Harry Manfredini music with Fred Mullin, like, because you're watching the screen and you're not paying attention to it, it just works better. All that mishmash of two different artists and a whole era of already existing Friday music along with new synth stuff. Like, but when you listen to it on the CD, it's just like so jarring, because okay, this track is like Jason Lives Part 6 music. This is Fred Mullin. So it's almost like it's just when you hear it just on audio alone, it's so jarring. Like, it's just like, okay, here's a compilation of what was good about the franchise before Fred Mullin came along, and then here's some Fred Mullin stuff. It's just, and then it would just alternate, and it's just like, I find myself when I was listening to some of it, like hearing a Manfredini track, and it's just like, well, that's just Part 6, and if I want to listen to that, I should just listen to Part 6 CD, and I'm here to listen to Fred Mullin, but why would I? Because when I listen to Fred Mullin, it's not that great, and just a weird situation buying and listening to this disc. But at the end of the day, it was $16 or whatever, or $17, whatever, after 21% off. So, as I say so oftentimes with things I buy and regret, life goes on, and that's surely the case here as well. One thing I can say that I really love about the release is, if I did the cover for this CD release, it's exactly how I do it. I absolutely love the cover art for this release. Simply using the classic North American poster art. Looks really great. Music from the motion picture on top. On the bottom, music by Harry Manfredini and Fred Mullin. Even that bit in the Friday the 13th font limited edition, red on black, looks great. It's actually a really great looking CD. Maybe it looks better than it sounds. Get a 15-page booklet with some pictures that I've probably never seen before of production stills and stuff that documents the history of the soundtrack for this movie, which is always interesting. Like I say, I looked and looked and looked, and I don't think there's very much that was said about the fact that this isn't the finished soundtrack as we're used to hearing in the finished film. I think there's a little bit towards the end about some sound editor adding extra stuff or something, but would have been nice to get a little more on that whole sordid history with this soundtrack. Compact disc itself looks pretty cool. Once again, probably something I'd do if I were in control. Just a close-up on the classic North American theatrical poster. behind where the CD is housed classic imagery that Nintendo also used for their video game release of Jason just about to hack an axe into bitch Melissa's face. 39 tracks total, album time 78 minutes 22 seconds. Oh, in closing, that's something I wanted to mention and I almost forgot to mention. Basically, it seems like, and you might wonder, how could there possibly be 78 minutes of music? And that's something I wondered as well. And the reason is because although I didn't listen to this whole thing, simply just listening to some of the Fred Molan tracks, like I get the feeling that this is, and a lot of fans of Part 7 might really be excited and interested about this, and I am too. It is kind of cool. From what I can discern, we might be getting extended versions. This might be all of the stuff that Fred Molan presented to Paramount, or the production for this film, and Paramount just used what, the music editor or whoever used whatever they deemed best and whatever. So don't quote me, but it's very possible that this is like, so instead of being like only stuff you heard in the movie, it might be like, kind of like all that Fred Molan presented for this film, and some of it might not have been featured in the movie. The Fred Molan stuff, even though I've heard this so many times and seen this movie so many times, it's just so, like more or less bland and blah that I can't necessarily tell if I've heard something before. But like, for example, with like the opening credits, that's just like bum bum bum, like it just, some things just seem to go on and on. Like there's a track which is like Tina's theme, and Tina and the guy's theme or whatever. So stuff that seems to be more abbreviatedly used, like in the finished film, which seems, on the CD, unless it's just my imagination, certain cues and stuff seem to be longer. So maybe they just clipped, used bits and pieces of what they felt, like the sound editor or something, what they felt would be good, or maybe with the director's input as well. So it's very possible that the CD release might actually be all of what Fred Molan presented, and not everything was actually used in the finished film. It's possible, but I can't 100% confirm that, because as of yet I haven't been able to make myself listen to like all of the Fred Molan stuff. But from the general stuff that I've been listening to, or that I listened to so far, that's the impression I get. Guess that pretty much does it for this CD review. Hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, we'll catch you on the next video.